I think, for this whole situation is that last year there was some huge legislative accomplishments, both at the national level and at the state level, that will go a long way to helping us meet our climate goals. So we're lucky enough to have Julian Cyr, our representative, to come here and maybe shed a little light on what all this legislation is about and how we can expect that to trickle down to the town level, because ultimately all climate change solutions are here, right? We're the ones that have to do it. And so they can pass all kinds of bills, but it's us down here at the bottom that have to actually implement everything. So, Julian Cyr, take it away. Hopefully everybody knows Julian. He'll introduce himself.
Thank you, Valerie, for that introduction. For that reminder, Valerie and I had a similar tenure at Nauset Regional High School. I was one of those naughty kids who, I guess, somehow wasn't in your fabulous science class. So I apologize for that. But my name is Julian Cyr. I'm the state senator for the Cape and Islands District. That encompasses 19 communities across Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, including Harwich. I think you all know that. I see a lot of old friends in the audience. A lot of people who helped get me elected to state senate the first time in 2016. Back when it was quite a quixotic run, right? A 29-year-old queer kid from the small town of Cape Cod is not supposed to be the state senator here. But really, actually, thanks in big part to Harwich, actually. I'm now serving in my 4th term. I have terrific partnership. Tremendous partnership with State Representative Sarah Peak, who is not only State Representative of the 4th Barnstable District, including Harwich, but really the Dean of our legislative delegation. And Sarah is just a tremendous partner with me and the whole delegation on so many issues, but particularly on climate. So she's with us this morning as well. What I think I'm going to do is just give you sort of an overview of what we've been doing, and then let's get into questions. And you know, I think that kind of conversation, I'm glad to answer what I know. This is a very meaty, complicated, wonky subject area, and things are changing, right? We have a new administration. Some of the issues that Valerie talked about with the Department of Public Utilities, that's going to be changing, right? And some new people taking the helm. Right, so for Cape Codders, for Islanders, the climate crisis, this isn't some hypothetical thing, right? We're living this on a daily basis. And it's not only very much real, but it's pretty existential, right? When you make your life on a peninsula or on an island that's relatively low-lying. We've got some pretty significant, pretty daunting long-term challenges, right? We know that in a couple hundred years, if the sea level rise sort of continues, living on Cape Cod and the islands is going to look very different, maybe quite tough to do. But then in the much more near term, right? Anyone who's spent any sort of amount of time here, you can see how our storms have worsened, how our seasons are changing. This is like really weirdly nice for the end of March, right? This is traditionally like, March is awful, right? March and April are like horrible times here. So we're seeing this, right? And we've seen these changes in our own lifetime. And in Massachusetts, actually from Rich Delaney and the Center for Coastal Studies, we're losing 65 acres a year in the state of Massachusetts due to flooding and coastal erosion. And that actually is even more accelerated when you look from a Cape Cod perspective. So on the Outer Cape, according to the Boston Globe, Outer Cape beaches, those barrier beaches, in my neck of the woods of Truro and Walfleet, are losing an average of 3 feet of shoreline each year due to increasingly intense wave activity. And so the erosion, the Cape has always been a place built by erosion, actually. The extremities of the region, Provincetown and Monomoy, only actually came to exist through erosion, right? Through the eroding, basically waves pounding the backside of the Outer Cape and then sort of pushing sand down, pushing sand up, building up, Providence is a sandbar, literally. Monomoy is a sandbar, literally. But we're really seeing an acceleration. And that erosion is now double for what it had been for thousands of years as a result of both sea level rise and change in wave action. And eastern Massachusetts, we could see a rise in sea levels between 1 and 2 meters by 2100. Is that what we're saying? I don't know. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to say that. I probably won't. This leads to a whole host of challenges for us, right? Saltwater intrusion into not only freshwater wetlands, but also our aquifer. We have a very robust blue economy here. Yes, in traditional marine activities, shellfishing, aquaculture, fishing, but also, a very large blue science economy. Much of that is in Woods Hole, but we have some of that here in Harwich. We have some of that, in Provincetown as well. With fishing, with aquaculture really has been the bright light in an otherwise challenging environment for fisheries. So a whole host of challenges kind of get involved there. We're also seeing acidification, so ocean acidification, or essentially the chemical composition, the pH of our of marine waters is changing, and it's becoming more acidic, and it becomes more difficult for those shells to build, or for those invertebrate mollusks to build their shells, which also puts real strain on not only sort of the aquaculture side of the business, right, but the real reliance we have on these animals to help us clean our waters. So you have ocean acidification, we have warming waters, we have shifting seasons, the dangerous algae blooms that we're seeing, particularly, part of this as well is like based on our land use habits and how we address wastewater or don't address wastewater, right? These algae blooms are part of our own, well, I guess all of this is our own doing in many ways, but the algae blooms are kind of closer to home, right? Title V septic systems are good at keeping pathogens out of the environment. They're very bad at keeping nitrogen and phosphorus out of the environment, and so particularly in a freshwater environment, the excess phosphorus causes this blue-green algae to grow. But all of this puts our very livelihoods at risk, and at risk in the near term, right? Not something that's going to happen in 100 years, but something we're living today. And we also have to deal with a whole host of needs related to extreme weather, related to planning. So we're at like this critical moment, and we've been at a critical moment, and I think back to what would have been possible had we taken action sooner. But that's not the world we're living in. And so right now, what we do on the climate crisis will determine whether future generations can prosper or even survive here. And so we bear this urgent responsibility, and I will say this, the good news is that, all of my colleagues get this. And in the Senate and also in the House, we have taken very aggressive action. In the last legislative session, passed 2 landmark omnibus bills related to climate that I'm going to talk about, give you an overview of, and then we can get into a conversation. And this is all about doing everything we can to put Massachusetts on a roadmap to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which we've done, and then putting us on a plan to bolster offshore wind, to rapidly electrify our cars and our public transit, and then decarbonize our buildings, which I think right now, if you look at the 3 things we need to do, we're moving forward pretty aggressively on having renewable electricity source through offshore wind. We're leading the country on this. We know what we need to do in transit, and we're trying to really move rapidly our transportation away from fossil fuel vehicles, and the decarbonizing of buildings. That's going to be sort of the toughest one for us, right? Because we live, 80% of the homes here were built before 1980. These are small, small old historic homes are complicated to install heat pumps and sort of all these other sort of things, and it's costly to homeowners. So we've got some steep challenges ahead. So I'm going to talk about sort of the 2 initiatives or 2 legislative initiatives that really bring a whole bevy of state policy and law in response to the serious threat that's posed by the realities of the climate crisis. So the first is an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy, which is also referred to as the Next Generation Climate Roadmap Act, which was signed into law in March 2021. This was actually legislation we had worked on the prior session and had held over into the 2021-2022 session. This is a big deal. The law sets mass carbon emissions reductions to at least 50% below 1990 levels by 2030, and achieves net zero carbon emissions by 2050. It empowers local governments to apply stricter energy codes to new construction. It prioritizes access to solar energy, particularly in low-income communities. It authorizes an additional 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind, and it recognizes and really begins to account for the needs of environmental justice communities, EJ communities, who have traditionally borne the brunt of adverse health and environmental effects when it's come to our energy generation, historic energy generation, our fossil fuel-based energy generation, and continue to. So the Roadmap Act, sort of lays out the plan and how we're going to get to net zero, carbon emissions by 2050, and how we're going to reduce by 50%, really in the next 7 years, right, of what our target emission levels were in 1990. The second chunk of legislation that was passed and signed into law in August 2022 of this year is an act driving clean energy and offshore wind. The legislation, again, does a lot. So it establishes Massachusetts Office of Wind Industry Investment Program that's administered by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, the CEC, to incentivize offshore wind development in the industry. It creates a Massachusetts Offshore Wind Industry Investment Fund that can be used for a number of initiatives, but particularly encouraging domestic supply chain components for the offshore wind industry. Offshore wind is an industry that's really taken off, and I think was really launched in Europe. Much of the expertise kind of lies in Europe. Oh, they wanted the lights down. Sometimes the lights.
I won't.
No worries.
I just want to make sure I wasn't leaning on
Yeah, no, you're good. It's but I think we're really trying to build a domestic industry here. The new law removes the price cap for new offshore projects that requires each new project to offer power at a lower price than its predecessor if there's a certain amount of bidders. We've been really concerned initially with offshore wind that the price of offshore wind would be just so unsustainable to consumers. A number of things have happened. One, the cost of offshore wind is significantly less than we expected. Also, the cost of fossil-based fuels, particularly natural gas and oil that we use to heat our homes and actually power a lot of our current power plants, that cost has increased and continued to increase. So now actually the benefit for that offshore wind is actually much cheaper electricity than how we're currently heating our homes and powering half of these lights, than we thought they were. The new law gives preference to offshore wind bids to companies that invest in local. So a lot of this bill is about like the process and how we're going to build offshore wind. So for companies who invest in local manufacturing, who provide employment opportunities, particularly for underrepresented populations, including tribal communities, who adopt good labor practices, and then also working to mitigate environmental effects and impacts. We know that almost any electricity generation has some form, even of renewables, right? Some form of adverse environmental effect, right? But certainly wanted to make sure that we're reducing that effect. And offshore wind, hydropower, solar, right? Significantly less environmental effect than our current fossil fuel-based heating and electricity-based generation. The bill also establishes a commission around fisheries issues. We also focus on solar. It removes the net metering cap on small solar arrays. This is what's sort of held back, particularly residential solar, has been that net metering cap, or also the ability for sort of small scale, community-based solar projects, the kind of solar you may put in a dump, right? The landfill, the transfer station, but you're over the cap dump, right? Like with those solar panels. And it requires, and it also puts a whole list of requirements on utilities to be really looking at how they're going to update both transmission and distributions of their grid. So that's really crucial as we are changing how, as we're changing where we get our electricity from, and we're actually putting a lot more, heating and cooling, particularly of our homes, onto the electrical grid. right? That's actually putting a lot more load on the grid, right? So we need to update. We need to update both transmission and distribution lines. We need to focus on the resiliency of that grid, and we're ultimately going to need energy storage, right? Because particularly with offshore wind, right? The wind doesn't blow consistently at the same, as you all know, as any Cape Cod know, it's not consistent, and that similarly with solar, with other renewables, right? Energy storage becomes a really key piece of this. The new law also mandates that this is less relevant for us, but mandates an all-electric fleet of the MBTA, and it bans the sale of any new internal combustion powered cars by 2035.
What year?
2035 in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts joins California and maybe I believe it's either Maryland or New York. I'm not sure.
It's like 6 states.
Yeah, that have done that, right? And so, this is a real strategy, and I think particularly for car manufacturers, if you can't sell a product in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 states, that really sort of forces their hand, even in the absence of federal action. And then there's a whole host of work as well around how do we look at regional transit authorities and how do we move them to electrify. So that's been sort of part one and part two of the work we've done just in the last 2 years. But there remains sort of so much more to do, right? Whether it be the offshore wind, and let me talk about sort of these three kind of pieces about how we get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and how do we get to the 50% reduction from 1990 levels by in 7 years, right? So electricity, Massachusetts electricity, this is going to come for us through offshore wind. Vineyard Wind 1, largest first industrial scale offshore wind project in the country. It's going to be starting to come online at the end of this year. At the beginning of next year, it's going to provide enough electricity for 400,000 homes. That's a huge, huge deal. It's landing right here on Cape Cod in Barnstable at Couples Beach. That is then going to be followed with several other projects. I can talk a little bit. I know you've been following this offshore wind piece. Kind of like what's going on here. Because what's basically happened, there are a number of offshore wind projects that are happening south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, about 14 miles south of both islands. They're sort of barely visible, maybe on a really clear day. And if you're on a certain point in the islands, you'll be able to see them. But these are true offshore installations. Each of these turbines are quite large, right? So they're very different than any turbine you may see. The land-based turbine, even the turbines that were being proposed, for Cape Wind, right? These turbines are like, at the crest of their, turbine are as tall as the Empire State Building, right? So these are very big, efficient turbines that generate a lot of electricity. There are the two next projects which are coming in, which is Mayflower Wind, or now it's called, they keep on changing their names. So it gets hard to track, but Mayflower Wind, which again is now called South Coast Wind, and an off-grid project, Commonwealth Wind. Those are the second and the third Massachusetts-based projects. I do want to say there are other projects happening in these waters that are Connecticut projects and that are New York projects. That a Connecticut project in particular, Park City Wind, their transmission lines are also connecting into Barnstable, but it's not a Massachusetts-based product. Although, of course, how we do the grid and electricity is regional here, right? So we have ISO New England, which is a regional grid of the 6 New England states. So like the power is flowing into our grid, even though you're purchasing another source of power. So with the second and the third projects, what they're running into, right, is that the cost of doing business, particularly the cost of steel, has increased substantially. And also the Europeans, in response to the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes a whole host of investment and subsidy in renewables in the United States, the Europeans now are being like, okay, we're sort of in a friendly green renewables race, right? Who's going to build this? So all these sort of pressures are making the existing price per kilowatt hour, which is guaranteed in the contracts, making it hard for the second and the third projects to get financing from basically financing to build the projects. And so they're coming to the state and basically asking to say, hey, look, we negotiated like, I think it's like 72 cents a kilowatt hour, we want to go to 76. You know, that, or 78, or sort of whatever they're trying to negotiate. The state, of course, is like, no, we really want like affordable, cheap electricity here for this. You sign a contract with us, you have to apply to the contract. So we're in a current scenario where the offshore wind developers and the state are sort of in a little bit of sort of a tense moment in figuring this out. The truth of the matter is these offshore wind projects need the state to move forward. Massachusetts is the place you want to be doing business. We've invested first from all these other states. And we also need these offshore wind projects, right? If we don't have these offshore wind projects by 2028, we have no hope of reaching that 2030 climate target. So there's a bit of a game of chicken going on right now. Broadly, this is sort of my like political analysis here, but I think we're going to work this out, to figure this out because it's just too important. And also, the price of electricity is still significantly less than what people are paying for carbon-based electricity and heating, whether it be natural gas or oil. So there's real, most of our electricity in Massachusetts now is powered by natural gas. Actually, interestingly, when Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station came offline, which a lot of us think worked hard to close that plant, that actually reduced or that increased our reliance on carbon-based electricity because it was not replaced with any other renewables. Hopefully a short-term gap, right, but just important to acknowledge. So that's just happening in that first pillar, that electrical space. In the second space, the transportation space, I talked about this a little bit, phasing out fossil fuel-based vehicles, moving towards electric vehicles. The technology, I think, is well worn here. You already see car manufacturers moving on this. There's significant state and federal tax credits to really incentivize people to move. I think my biggest kind of concern about this is how do we do this equitably? So if you look at the tax credits that exist make purchasing, whether it's the Volt or the Tesla or whatever it is, more affordable, right? But if you still can't afford that car loan or don't have the down payment for this, particularly in an environment of very high interest rates or relatively high interest rates, it is going to make it sort of challenging. But I think we clearly know what we need to do on transportation. Again, grid reliability and grid modernization is again very important to that, right? Because if we're adding onto the need of our grid of being able to supply electricity to charge all of our cars every night, that's a significant increase. And then the third piece, and really I think the most challenging, the hardest piece here is decarbonizing our built environment. This is, we are sitting in a municipal building that I assume is heated by gas, probably, right?
Yep.
By gas and a gas line here. The town of Harwich has dozens of buildings that
Very
it
high
owns.
efficiency, and we are a green community.
Which is
and we did go through that process.
But all of that, like to say, even in a place like Harwich, which is a green community, which I think has done more than most, right? That transition is going to be really sort of difficult. So think about your home and how your current home is heated and cooled, and particularly if an older home, what it would sort of take from a heat pump perspective to do that, right? So that's going to be the part that's going to be toughest, and I think we're going to have to really figure out how do we provide support to homeowners, how do we figure out ways to provide some level of subsidy for this, and also just bite the bullet on it. So I really see the decarbonizing of our built environment as the most painful to us as sort of individuals. It's also the most essential, right? Because if we don't decarbonize our built environment, we're still leaving about a third of our emissions, on the table, which is untenable. Now, all this has to happen in the context of like every other state and like most other countries, industrialized countries, doing the same thing. So this remains a very heavy lift, and I think the sobering piece is that you look at the latest data on it, the latest study that came out from the UN is they're like, it's basically like, well, this is worse than we thought. This is happening like quite quickly. I think what's heartening to me is in a place like Massachusetts, when you look at policy making, things tend to go sort of really slow, right? And then they start to finally sort of accelerate. And when you often see acceleration in policy making, it's because you have kind of innovators and sort of leaders who sort of pushing the envelope. And I think what we're trying to do here in Massachusetts is not only to save ourselves, but provide ourselves as a model with several other states around how we're going to do this. And I think in some ways we are, we've got a lot of the right ingredients that are very helpful for us, right? We do have a lot of wind, that we're able to tap into, which is really going to allow us to transition our electricity. We do have real broad public support on this. This is not sort of a partisan issue in Massachusetts. There's a lot of consensus here. I do think the new administration makes a world of difference. So Governor Healy has said repeatedly that she wants Massachusetts to be the strongest in the nation on transitioning to net zero, the strongest in the nation on climate. Yes, that means the policies I talked about. It also means climate resiliency, environmental justice policies, and others. And that really matters because some of the issues Valerie was talking about, for instance, how the Department of Public Utilities told the Cape Light Compact, all right, you can provide home energy audits and do this work in these homes, but not those homes, right? That's from a Department of Public Utilities that's comprised of a board of 3 appointed by the governor. Governor Healy's 2 recent appointees look very different than Governor Baker's 2 appointees. The DPU, some of us would argue, I would have argued, under the Baker-Peel administration, were very much oriented to favoring the utilities, to Eversource, National Grid. Look, there are certainly considerations, and at the end of the day, we need these utilities to be, to have sort of a state-sanctioned monopoly to serve as public utilities. But I think the change in those appointments are going to make a difference, I think, particularly for us on Cape Cod, where we do have the Cape Light Compact. We do have other innovations where, again, we're trying to move more quickly even than other communities in the state. So I think that's going to make a very big difference. The governor and lieutenant governor also appointed a climate change czar, effectively, someone to coordinate these activities, not just within the Executive Office of Environment and Energy, but across state government, and to really be bringing that lens. I think this
Is that person?
That person's named. That person's in. They've started, and they sit in the secretary and they report to the governor. There's also the Secretary of Environment and Energy and all the other kind of players that are traditionally within those organizations. But there are a number of pieces, even in the first law I talked about, the roadmap, the Drive Act, that were not implemented or implemented in a poor manner under the prior administration, right? It's not just enough to pass laws, but implementation really sort of matters. Again, this is sort of hard stuff to do, right? But I think the new administration is very aggressive on this issue, and I think aggressive is the right word. We need to be very aggressive on this. I think our lack of action for the last several decades when we've been aware of this has really put us to a real tipping point. Some scientists and others would argue that we're sort of past that tipping point in many ways. So I think we can look to have better partnership under the incoming administration. So that's sort of a snapshot of what's going on from a legislative perspective. We've got a whole host of bills that are pending related to solar. I'm really trying to get some real traction on ocean acidification, the issue that I talked about earlier. We had a special commission on ocean acidification that I chaired with Dylan Fernandez, who's a state representative from the Woods Hole area. It basically lays out a whole plan around how do we deal with ocean acidification. We actually established a Blue Communities program, modeled on the Green Communities program, to get cities and towns to be looking at a whole list of policies, everything from runoff and wastewater, also things that they can do from a near-shore perspective. So watch on ocean acidification. And I think you'll see us do another major climate bill again this session. The Senate President has said that she wants to do and intends for us to do significant climate legislation every session. And I think given the scale of the problem, what we're facing, look, we need to give some time and ability and ramp up for these programs to be implemented, right? But I think we're really trying to build. Maybe this is a poor analogy, given that planes are quite carbon, fossil fuel heavy utilizing vehicles, right? But we're trying to build a plane on the runway on this, and I'm encouraged by the consensus that there is. I'm thrilled with this new administration, who I think is particularly on the details is going to be better for us and better for constituents in the public and less utility friendly. And this is a crucial, important space to keep watching and to keep pushing for. And right, Harwich is a green community, but what else can be done here? How else do folks tap into the fabulous resource, particularly of the Cape Light Compact, as we think to how we decarbonize our homes, and how to get a jump start on that, because that's going to be the toughest thing to do, and it's not going to get any easier. So that's sort of a lay of the land of where we are legislatively, and just glad to take any questions.
So, does the state have any understanding of how the Inflation Reduction Act money is going to be handled? Like, where is that coming from? Where is it going? What is it going to be doing?
So there's a ton of Inflation Reduction Act monies that are flowing to the Commonwealth, and actually, there's really three bills here that we're talking about from federal resources. There's CARES Act money that was, when was CARES Act passed? In 2020, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
There's ARPA, American Rescue Plan dollars, and then there's the bipartisan, there's four. There's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then there's the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction is really focused on basically a series of tax credits and incentives around saying, all right, we're gonna make it really, really appealing to invest in renewables. That is gonna benefit Massachusetts companies, or it's gonna benefit these offshore wind projects, and then benefit ratepayers in that way. The bipartisan infrastructure bill has a whole host of money, particularly related to wastewater and water programs as well, PFAS, forever chemicals, lead in pipes. This is important for us because we're not only having to do climate resiliency, we're not only having to do climate change adaptation projects, we also have resiliency projects, and then we have a lot of infrastructure we don't have, like sewering, like updating our water lines, that is going to need to be done, and need to be done in the context of figuring out, all right, well, how does this all work in the context of a changing climate with higher seas. And then there's all sorts of other pots of money in both the CARES Act and in ARPA that have flowed, to Marshall County, the Cape Light Compact, the state. I don't have a sort of a comprehensive list of all that here.
Like, from a consumer point of view, like, as I said earlier, all of, whatever we do about climate, it doesn't happen in the State House, it doesn't happen in Washington DC, it happens here. You and me and the decisions that we make on what to drive and what to heat our houses with. But there's a lot of consumer or citizen whiplash right now. We were told, that we have to sewer, right? And so the town has a fairly robust plan for sewering the town. But then we said, well, maybe that's not fast enough, maybe you're gonna have to update your septic system. Maybe you'll have to do both, and both of them will cost you money. In the meantime, you're gonna have to get rid of your car, get an EV, don't forget you're gonna have to update to a heat pump, which is, the heat pump alone for a house is like $25,000. So,
A cheap one.
updating your septic system, $25,000, connecting to the sewer at a couple $1,000.
The good news is your home values have all increased pretty substantially, 54% since 2017 to 2022.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is that, that even as the town, we're trying to put a couple of EV chargers at one of our municipal parks. Nobody knows where to go, what to do, who to ask, it's, because we're a little town. We don't have a climate person, whose job it is to shepherd these projects through. We have town employees and volunteers. Town of Barnstable, big enough, they hire a climate person. But we're never gonna do that. So I think from the state point of view, it's great to say you've got all these programs, but the nitty gritty, this is
how you apply for this loan or this grant, and this is what you can expect. You know, it's very confusing when you try to actually access any of this.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's,
Yeah.
There's some decisions that should have been made 20, 30 years ago that would have made a real difference. I wasn't around for that. I remember, I think, I'm being cute, but, I think back to, Ed found, what year was this from, that letter? I love this, is my favorite thing.
It's a group of 4 town reports.
For what year?
It's like 77 to 81.
So it basically, it's correspondence from the federal government, like 77 to 81, being like, dear town of Harwich, like, you can have a sewer, we will cover 90% of the cost. And the town, of course, said no, because of different currents that were going around. I think real concerns of, like, overdevelopment. But, like, that being said, we've got to figure this out. And we don't have an option to ignore our wastewater crisis. We don't have an option to ignore the climate crisis. We don't have an option to not transition our transportation and our built environment. I think what becomes key, right, is how you actually do this, right? So how, like, the expansion that you see here in these 2 laws related to resources for the Clean Energy Center, and then also bolstering, they're called municipal aggregators, but you all know them as the Cape Light Compact, right? Cape Light Compact is like fabulous work. How we're gonna decarbonize our built environment here on the Cape, one, we're further ahead than almost any other part of the state because of the Cape Light Compact, but it's gonna flow through an entity like the Cape Light Compact. So that's why we're kind of doing the nitty-gritty, in some cases hand-to-hand combat, particularly with the municipal aggregators, because utilities don't like the municipal aggregators. They fund them, right, but they don't like them. But really the implementation piece that really matters, and this is where, Governor Healy having a climate czar, having real focus in sort of bolstering all the resources that can be provided to figure this out is crucial, because in Massachusetts, we don't do this at the county level, we don't do this at the state level, we do it town by town, and that has benefits and it has drawbacks, but it's the world we're living in. So I actually feel pretty good about the resources that have already come from the Green Communities program, right? Yep. Green Communities, I think, is a really good roadmap in how we're gonna scale this more broadly, right? So, this building, right, is probably is on gas and probably not oil because of Green Communities, because of technical assistance that was provided. That's what this is gonna look like at sort of a municipal level. There's real work on it to change the Department of Public Utilities. Some of the frustration, I don't know the specific example with the EV charging stations, but my hunch is like Eversource is making it difficult, right?
I think it's just, Eversource won't move until they're assured that their grant money is secure, because the state is providing them grant money to do the engineering to put in EV charging stations. And then once they do the engineering, then the town has to get another contract to actually install the chargers, so it's sort of a patchwork of things that you have to do.
And then but broadly, I think it's been because I think we've been a little too gentle with the utilities, and I think that's going to sort of change. So this is how this looks like when this is implemented. I think on the wastewater piece, and I do want to, this is not, of course this is related, right, because it's all kind of tied up and related. Towns are being asked under the draft regulations from the Department of Environmental Protection. Towns are being asked to basically stick to a version of the 208 plan that was established 9 years ago, that had a 30-year timeline in basically addressing the very significant nitrogen and phosphorus issue we have because of Title V septic systems, or worse, they're not Title V, they're not up to code. 9 years was sort of eclipsed from 208, so the DEP reg clock says the next 20 years you have to have a plan. What the regs say, if you don't have an approved plan, the plan is is challenging, right? I want to acknowledge this is like a very expensive, costly thing to do, in part because we didn't do it when there was a lot of federal subsidy for this, when it was a lot cheaper to do, with a whole host of those things, right? If the town doesn't have that plan, then the residents in the town would be subject to essentially having to have their Title V septic system, inspected within 5 years, the dirty secret we all know is that most of these top septic systems are not compliant, people aren't having them pumped on a regular basis, all this sort of stuff. That only is triggered if your town doesn't have a plan. So Harwich has a plan, we'll submit the plan will get approved. You know, yeah, it's a 20-year timeline, but we really have a 30-year timeline, right? And we've just wasted 9 years. So, you know, this is like a very heavy lift. What we've done, you know, the legislative delegation has probably done the most of any of the sort of 3 players, towns, the state, and the feds on coming up with money for this. So in 2018, Sarah Peak and I led an effort to create the Cape Cod and Islands Water Production Fund. This puts a 2.75% surcharge on all room occupancy, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, and that goes into a fund dedicated to wastewater. It's already provided funding for $98 million worth of local projects in its first 2 years. It's other people's money that you would otherwise be having to pay either as a homeowner on your betterment or as a property taxpayer into the town of Harwich, right? So that's been a real game changer. What we're trying to figure out now is how do we come up with more money to solve the wastewater problem. But we've already, with the Cape Islands Water Protection Fund, we're already shaving off. It's an additional 20 to 25% subsidy. It's very significant. Wastewater, by the way, is also how we solve this other whole little crisis we haven't talked about today, and I won't talk about too much, right, which is housing, right? So there's a sort of whole artful thing that works if you can coordinate it. It's just really difficult to do, you know, because I think as Valerie said, you know, you are talking about the resources of a small town. You do have people in your community, and a lot of us, right, increasingly, so many of us are, you know, you may be land rich, but you're cash poor, you're on a restricted income. So it sort of creates all the challenges in implementation, but I think we're trying to be really creative around, all right, how do you make sure that you're putting a suite of resources, kind of like compact-esque for particularly the built environment space. I think that ultimately, the transportation space, the electricity side of things, we're going to worry about the state, and you don't have to. Other questions?
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, I've got to, yeah.
I just have a question. I understand that way back there was, in connection with the 208 plan, there was a lawsuit from the Conservation Law Foundation. Is that still active? Has it been renewed or whatever happens in the legal terms? And is that another piece of what's pushing that whole thing forward?
Yes, I would expect that were we not to move forward on these plans with the Department of Environmental, with the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, the Conservation Law Foundation and other environmental groups would come back, would sue US EPA, basically using Cape Cod as the example that we're not in compliance with Chapter 208 or Section 208 of the Clean Water Act that comes from the 70s. It's called the 208 plan because it's Section 208 of the law. And we would lose that. We would lose in court and have a court ordered. We'd have some sort of court ordered thing that probably a lot of y'all wouldn't like. So yeah, like this is real. Like we've got to do this, and I think if we don't move forward on it, I think we're going to end up back in court.
It could be like Boston Harbor.
Yeah, and look, I will say this: Boston Harbor is like
And
really
it came out good.
clean. It kind of came out good, but you know, this is before. I wasn't in office during the sort of initial 208 kind of conversations and fights, but there was a lot of sort of consternation about, you know, it's called MWRA for Cape Cod or sort of whatever else. But basically, if we don't do this, that lawsuits, that's very real, and like we will lose because like we are in very clear violation. I was talking, yeah.
It's our sword of Damocles.
Yeah, no, it's, and I was with I had dinner with a water expert, a hydrologist last night, and my sister, and she reminded me that even if we sewered all of Cape Cod, even if we sewered everything we need to sewer and install the alternative septic systems, if we did all the things like tomorrow or in the next like 2 or 3 years, you have to think of Cape Cod from a hydrological perspective as like almost like being like this bathtub, and that's full of like nitrogen filled water, and we've like left the tap on, right? By installing sewers, you're basically turning the tap off. It's going to take 25 to 30 years for that bathtub full of nitrogen to drain out of our embankment. So the scale of this problem is like really bad and really big, and so that's why I kind of tend to be of the mind thinking, all right, like let's not let the opportunity, you know, pass this by like we did before. Let's figure out how do we bite the bullet on this, and then how do we bring back as much resources as possible so that this is, you know, this is as affordable as possible, especially for working people. With the acknowledgement that we've got plenty of folks who, you know, you talk to Richard around in the real estate market, right? You've got plenty of folks who are, maybe don't have those concerns from like a second home or third home perspective. But really, like, that's what we've got to figure out. I'm sorry, you had a question, sir, and then I'll go back to you.
I was just going to say, on some of this, the affordability goes away. There's no affordability in Massachusetts, there's no affordability in Cape Cod. We've been talking about it for decades, and we've made almost no progress. I think you and I exchanged notes on that. And now we've got a crisis of people leaving Massachusetts, 110,000 people over the last 2 years. And I don't know, and it's like the reputation and image of Massachusetts has taken a bad hit the last 3, 4, 5 years. So you say, okay, how do we, one, do some things that make it more affordable for the middle class and retirees? How do we stem the exodus of people and that take their money and resources with them? And this Cape Cod is, I'm retired, and I'm on a fixed income, and my electric bill was up 40–50%. You know, so, you know, when you talk about these big things that are, you know, the original build out of the wastewater projects on Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, were $4 billion. That was 6–7 years ago. And then you think about what these bridges are supposed to cost. It started at $1 billion, now they're at $4 billion. So this wastewater thing has doubled. It's an $8 billion number, and God bless you about the 2.75%, but it's never gonna come up to $8 billion.
It's gonna add up to,
You got
it'll be like $1 billion.
100 million in 2 years. So just go through the math.
Yeah,
And we're adding more expense because we're accelerating it. So my only point is that Massachusetts, you know, has all these things that are huge costs, and it's almost like they're independent buckets, but we've got to look at them in the aggregate and say, what is this going to do to the middle class and retirees? And so many people leaving, and the trend in the discussions of people I know is, I'm thinking of getting out of here. And that's a big concern. I don't want to leave, but I'm almost thinking I might have to, because I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
and from a Cape Cod perspective on this, we have about 1,000 families who leave a year, largely driven by housing. I would really argue that in Massachusetts we've got a lot of things that are going well for the state as far as the knowledge-based economy, that we have a robust and a strong economy. What we don't have, we're down, we are down 200,000 housing units. We need about 200,000 housing units. I would argue, and if we built, I think if you actually built those 200,000 housing units, it would actually sort of help to deal with some of these other issues, right? And particularly, you know, from a millennial or Gen Z perspective, you know, I can't afford to buy like a home here, especially in the part of the Cape that I live in, the outer Cape. Good luck. And look, I have plenty of privilege and whatever, but we're in this real predicament where, you know, I think my generation and younger folks are looking at this and saying, all right, like I'm just like not gonna have like the option to like build wealth and equity through like owning a home. Like isn't the way this whole middle class thing is sort of predicated on? And so I would argue the challenge for us is broadly on the affordability piece, and when you look at who is leaving, look, there's a level of like retirees who are going to leave here. One, it is just like cold, and it's like not as warm as other places. And there are certain tax pieces that actually we're trying to fix. I have a bill around reforming the estate tax, which I think will make a difference for some folks. But a lot of the people, when you look at who's leaving and not staying, people come to the state, they get educated in the state, and they leave. They don't leave because they don't have good job opportunities. They leave because it's like so damn expensive. And it's particularly so damn expensive from a housing perspective. On the electricity rates, the electricity, like we are like caught we're basically held hostage in basically having our old electricity system that's basically dependent on this natural gas. And really until these offshore wind projects come on, that's gonna stay high. The other piece is hydropower from Quebec has been a real solution. We've been a little jammed in the courts. Maine hasn't wanted us having transmission lines. By the end of this decade, electricity costs are we're gonna actually have pretty affordable electricity from renewables, but we've got this really painful period that sucks and it's not helping, right? And so, I've seen this too. I have a tunnel apartment. I'm like, how's my electric bill $300? Like, it heats with oil. But I think your points about affordability are really well taken. And I think this is why back to locally, this is why, you want to address affordability? You want to allow people to be able to live here? Well, you got to be able to have housing units. You got to be able to have some density. And the best way to do it, the only way to do it, is through the sewer, right? So what I want to figure out is, how do we continue to bring more resources? But you are looking at projects where between the state revolving loan fund and the sewer, and now the Cape Lands Water Protection Fund, you're starting to get 40–50% of those projects being subsidized by other people's money. We're not even counting some of the federal dollars, which we haven't figured out. It's stupidly expensive, but it's probably a heck of a lot cheaper than what we will end up with when we end up back in court if we don't sort of do it. So your comments are really, this is what we spend a lot of time thinking about. You, sir, and then you.
You've been suggesting that we take action now. I have a citizen petition for this town meeting on the regulation of fertilizers. That's allowing Harwich to have home rule ability to establish their own fertilizer regulations because we live here due to our water. So please, take a handout. Please come to town meeting. This is going to be hard to push, hard to get passed, but with your vote, it'll happen. So.
And Nantucket and Orleans have already done this.
Yes, they have.
Those efforts.
Yes.
So and this is, I think, is a little more doable than the pesticide. So a lot of us have passed through pesticide bans like this. I've been working pretty extensively on these issues. What I'm trying to do on both the fertilizer and the pesticide space. A lot of this is
pesticides next time.
a lot of this is governed. Almost all of this is governed by the Department of Agricultural Resources and the Pesticide Board. The board is comprised of environmental scientists and public health experts, but they don't have sort of veto authority. I want the Department of Public Health and Mass DP to have sort of veto authority over that board's work, because we do have particularly health and exposure concerns in the sole source aquifer that's sort of different than, say, if you're like, the MBTA just wanted to keep weeds off the tracks. But this is good stuff.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
How wonderful.
In regard to the question of affordability, and especially for lower income and middle income people, how to decarbonize your home and your vehicles, where is Governor Healy's lawsuit against the oil industry going? And is that, potentially at some point going to make funding available for Cape Cod citizens to deal with these issues?
It's a great question. I don't know the specifics of it. We can try to find out exactly. My sense is it's ongoing, as is often the case with a lot of this litigation. It just continues, and you don't know about it until they reach a settlement. Pardon?
Do you know if it's in court?
It's certainly been filed, so I don't know the specifics of it, but what I don't know, I'd be curious who I could find this out from, is how viable of a means do we think that is. We know, for instance, on another topic I've been working pretty extensively on, which is these forever chemicals, per and polychloroalkali substances, or PFAS. We're actually pretty bullish that we think we're going to settle with these manufacturers of these forever chemicals, because they've known since as early as the 50s and 60s, the adverse health effects associated with them, and they still put out a product. So I actually think we're going to get a big chunk of our money to deal with PFAS from those settlements, like we do with tobacco companies, like we've done with opiate manufacturers as well. I don't know on the carbon-based food. It's a good question.
Yeah.
So, yep.
I want to mention something else that people can get involved with if they would like to. Earth Day, April 21st, we're going to have an event in Harwich at the Cultural Center. And if you'd like a flyer about it, we'd love to have you join us. It's going to be a talk by Andrew Gottlieb from the APCC on maintaining home septic systems, and then we're going to have booths for lots of different organizations to have literature and information about good things we can do for our environment. So who doesn't have one of these already? And I'd love to, and if you'd like to get involved with the Harwich Climate Action Network, you could see me or Susan or Jacqueline. We'd love to have you participate. Do you want one as well?
Yeah, what's your opinion
Thank
of
you.
the mood of the legislature in modifying the state tax?
I think the mood on the estate tax is actually quite good. We actually passed reform, so I filed this bill last 2 sessions. It had a cheeky title, we called it an act relative to mitigation of snowbird relocation. It was actually adopted, the Senate and the House included a whole tax package that both chambers passed last session, so I think that's very good. The reason it fell apart, and the whole kind of tax reform package fell apart in part, was a real disagreement with Governor Baker over implementation of what's called the 62F. So y'all probably got like a check in the mail from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You probably liked the check, but it was probably a few $100 or something like that, right? So all those checks added up to $3 billion. And the way it was implemented is very regressive, right? So if you pay more in taxes in the state of Massachusetts, you got more money back, right? So I've got a friend who does quite well, and he got a $30,000 check back from the state of Massachusetts. He does not, I mean, he went and bought some fancy stupid car with it. He did not need that $30,000. So this was a real boondoggle and something that I really feel, talking about wastewater, could have probably gotten, some few $1 million for wastewater. Talking about climate, talking about all these things, we could have spent $3 billion in a way that would be much more helpful to most of our constituents. But this was a real sort of disagreement around 62F with $3 billion in basically the surplus that we had because of the very sort of unexpected results of the economy sort of post-pandemic or in the pandemic. With the $3 billion sort of out the door, the implementation of 62F, the legislature, and especially the Speaker of the House, backed away from doing a tax reform package that included the estate tax. So actually, we are coming back at it. I actually, when I wrap up here, the Joint Committee on Revenue has a hearing on several of these tax reform bills, including my estate tax bill. And I think the governor is actually testifying in favor of the estate tax reform now, and then whenever I get done with this, I'll go do it. So actually, estate tax reform, I think, is moving, because I think we realize, actually in part because of the affordability pieces, increasingly, well, almost all of us, if you own a home in Cape Cod, you're getting close to being considered part of the estate tax just based on the value of your home. That doesn't make any sense, right? The estate tax was really geared to be a progressive tax, right? Asking those with a tremendous privilege, sort of pay something. So I think there's real momentum on this. The question is about larger tax packages, a larger tax reform package, and in the context of the economy is sort of like unsettled right now. We don't really know what to expect. Revenues have sort of have plateaued and in a little case sort of dipped. So I think we're a little cautious about a recession. The good news is we're in a very strong fiscal position. We've never had more money in our rainy day fund, over $6 billion. So if we do end up in a recession or other sort of economic storms, we're in good shape for that. But I feel pretty bullish about the estate tax, and I really argue that it's an affordability, that it's a real piece around affordability, right? And particularly for Cape Cod families and Islander families, sometimes that house you may inherit that may be worth, this large sum of money, right? It's probably your only foothold in the community. And I've heard from constituents, the reason I filed the bill, who've been pushed out and who've had to, especially if they weren't savvy about figuring, all that legal stuff out long in advance of their loved one's death. And that's kind of just not right.
So I'm not sure I heard the answer.
The answer is yes. Sorry. I'm probably giving you too much context. When on an issue, if the governor says she's in support of it, and the House and the Senate have taken votes in support of a given issue, that means it's going to get done. My concern is about what's the vehicle we're gonna get this done in. It was part of a larger tax reform package. That tax reform package is in question because of 62F and because of like, basically a threat of a recession. I would argue we should still make the estate tax changes anyway. It's not a very big revenue hit, and we've actually fashioned it to be a quite progressive change. So it sort of maintains the estate tax on upper incomes. You basically raise the threshold to 2 million or something like that. But it's well positioned, but for anyone who's worked the legislature and state government, you know, nothing's done until it's like signed into law by the governor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, speaking of nothing gets done, what about the medical aid in dying, which made it out of committee last year and did not come up for a vote on the floor?
Yep, it went to the House.
What's your opinion on the mood of the legislature on that?
So I again feel pretty good about this bill advancing. I actually now chair the Joint Committee on Public Health, where the bill is referred. I support the bill, as is my co-chair. I think the question is, I think last session we referred the bill. So basically the bills go to a committee. The committee makes the determination on the bill, and then we'll send the bill either to the House or the Senate or both chambers. This went to the House and it sort of died in the House. I think we're gonna fight to get the bill back to the Senate this session and take a vote on it. I've talked to the Senate President about this issue. I think if this comes to the floor in the Senate, this has support, this will happen. You know, I think there was a very real part of the pandemic. The pandemic did truly like suck all the air out of the room for us in other legislating. It really did, you know, in most all other, you know, aspects. But not only do I strongly support the bill, but I think a majority of my colleagues strongly support the bill. We should be doing this. We've kicked the tires on this issue. The bill is very well drafted. It should happen, and I'm gonna be in a key role to help make it happen, at least in that first stage. I think we're gonna try to have an early hearing to get it out. So, you know, from a Senate perspective, we want this, and I think we're well primed in the House. But again, I don't wanna, I know better to think like, oh, this estate tax thing is done, and then like, oh, you know. So you're all good. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your patience.
In the question
and tolerating my very wonky responses. I'm probably trying to like give you a lens into actually what's going on, and not just be like, yeah, it's gonna happen, but actually to sort of explain what we wrestle with.
some solutions for people on affordability. Most towns in the Commonwealth have opportunities through your assessing office to have senior tax credits, to be able to defer your taxes on a house. And it may not be a lot, but as people talk about the value of the houses going up and being cash poor, there are opportunities, and we help over 250 seniors in this community every year in the town of Harwich. We have a budget of $400,000 that we can assist people. So if you know of someone who is having a difficult time meeting their bills, please call the assessor's office. It's based on criteria, it's a wide criteria, and your house is not considered an asset. So we can help a lot of people, and frankly, we could help a lot more. And if people could defer their taxes, and to be realistic, we have people in their 80s and 90s who are not going to live another 10 years, who can defer their taxes for that 10 years. And it's on simple interest, it's not a compounded interest. And when we look at these houses worth $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 today, when it goes to your estate, they'll pay off a small tax lien of $40,000, $50,000, but you have had the benefit of not having to pay taxes for a number of years. So that can assist some who are facing difficulties.
I gotta start talking about that, remembering that. The other piece that some towns have done too is year-round residential property tax exemption too. We have in Outer Cape. This really sort of helps, right? We've got to really think, how do we help, you know, local people who live here and stay here, and then also acknowledge, you know, in some, I don't know what the split is in Harwich. I know, you know, in Truro, like 2/3 of the homes are unoccupied most of the year, right? I think in Harwich it's more of a 50-50
And
split.
we have also filed legislation, our Board of Assessors through Representative Peak, to include those under the age of 60 who are having a difficult time trying to make it here. And if we can do something locally as a town to alleviate some of those taxes, allowing them to stay there and deal with some of these other things in terms of the wastewater and the affordability of utilities, we're going to try to do that. And we are making a concerted effort on your behalf as the Board of Assessors. And Senator, all of the Cape communities have these programs that are available, and they should be reminded of people when you do speak.
No, thank you, Commissioner. All right, you folks have been very generous with my time, your time, and my time. No, this is really wonderful, and I really want to thank Valerie and, you know, all the work in the climate action. This is a big, overwhelming, global challenge and issue, but there's so much that we are doing and can continue to do locally, and I think we really should continue to see ourselves as real leaders here, right? What we're doing in Massachusetts and on Cape Cod is the model, you know, for the rest of the country and how we get out of this. And I think that's something we should be really proud of, and really kind of, you know, be proud of it and like continue and try to double down on it, right? Because it is really daunting and it is really challenging and it can feel really, you know, overwhelming. But I think when we talk about how people can make it personal and what they can do, you know, in their own community, in their own homes, their own families, you know, it's maybe a little more achievable. So thank you for having me.